Welcome back to DIY Guitar Making at Eric Schaefer Guitars. My name is Eric Schaefer, and today I'm answering your questions from the comments. I have a question about bending a Florentine Cutaway. I have a question about sources for downloading guitar patterns. I have a question about radiusing fretwire. A question about how I make my headstock inlays. A question about the dimensions of a Mortise and Tenon. Another question about inlays, this time about inlays on a fretboard. And finally, I have a question about the radius of the plates. If you have a question that you'd like to have answered in a future episode, just write your question in the comments. Now let's go ahead and get right into it. Okay, so the first question I have is from Brendan McCarthy, and he's asking about doing a Florentine Cutaway. This guitar right here was in the background of one of my videos, and he was asking how I do this bend right here. This bend is called a Florentine Cutaway as opposed to a bend that doesn't come to a point, a gradual bend, which is called a Venetian Cutaway. So the Florentine Cutaway, if you can see this, is actually two different pieces right here. So for the whole guitar, normally you have two pieces, one on this side and one on the bass side, one on the treble side, one on the bass side. But with a Florentine, you actually have a third piece for the cutaway section as well. Whereas on a Venetian bend, the side would be bent and the cutaway would simply be bent into the side along with the waist and the other parts of the bend. So first of all, that's the two types of bends. That's what makes this bend different, is the fact that this bend comes to a point and it's made of two separate pieces instead of just one. Now, doing a cutaway like this, a Florentine Cutaway, is going to be significantly more involved than doing a Venetian Cutaway. A Venetian Cutaway, however, might be more difficult in a different way because you're more prone to breaking a side when you're doing such a severe bend as you get on the Venetian Cutaway. With the Florentine, at least you're dealing with two separate pieces, so it's a lot easier for it to bend without breaking. However, on the front end of things, the prep work, it's going to be more involved. And let me show you what I mean. I'm going to show you some of the jigs or the molds really that I had to build, the extra molds, to be able to do a Florentine Cutaway. Okay, so you look at all this, it's pretty significant as far as work. All of these were made out of MDF with a flush trim router bit. I would make a single piece, and I know I've explained this process before in many, many videos, the process of creating molds by making a template piece and then duplicating it many times on a flush trim router bit. So that's what I did to get all of this set up. You can see that even this large mold right here, this bending mold, is made in a similar fashion with many pieces of MDF duplicated off of the last one. So it takes a while, honestly, to build this, to be set up to make Florentine Cutaways, but Florentine Cutaways, I think, are just super cool. They're super stylish. They look a lot better, at least for the type of guitars that I build. So I think it's worth it, you know, to give that little extra something to your guitar. Gives you a little something extra, especially in the market if you're trying to sell your guitars, to be able to be one of the guys out there that's actually offering a cutaway model, specifically a Florentine Cutaway model, which again is just a more stylish cutaway. So what are all these molds that I have right here? This one right here, if you saw my videos, the last 3 videos that I did, which were on machine bending, this replaces the form that I had in the bending mold, but this is specifically for just that small little cutaway section right here. And then this, I had to make even a separate shoe for the bending machine. This goes right in there. So this is what presses down into the mold. And then these are for gluing down the separate pieces. Because unlike with a non-cutaway guitar, with a cutaway guitar, I have to glue the blocks in stages. I have to glue the neck block to this side right here and to part of the cutaway down here, which is coming in at an angle here. Not just an angle, but it's coming in at a contour. This gluing mold right here is set up specifically for that contoured angle right here. I can shape the neck block on here and then glue it in place using this mold as a backstop. And once that's done, I can then glue this little thing that I call the tip block. I think most people call it the tip block, which is just a little block that holds the smaller piece to the larger piece of the bent side. And you can see it a little better there. That's what this mold is for here. And you can see I have these little extra cuts here because when the sides are initially bent, they're bent a little bit oversized so that the excess side material can actually sit in those relieved areas right there. And this would just go in place like, have it backwards, hold on. Go in place just like that. And I can clamp that in place. Well, first of all, I actually shape this tip block in here by adding sandpaper to the mold and just sanding back and forth, and then I can glue this into this mold right here, just like this. And that's pretty much it. Well, I shouldn't say that's pretty much it. That is a window into the world of what it takes to make a Florentine cutaway. Of course, there's little nuances here and there, but I just wanted to give an idea of the extra work that's involved. Not only the extra prep work, but if you think about it, every individual side that I bend in that way is going to take quite a bit longer because I have to do all those extra sanding and gluing steps before I can get to the point where the sides are completely bent and they're attached to their blocks. And the next question is from Siavash Ansari. Siavash writes, is there a source for downloading guitar patterns? So I'm assuming, Siavash, that you're talking about specifically downloading. You said downloading, so I'm taking you at your word there that you mean downloading and not purchasing a physical copy of plans. Because you can purchase paper plans, which will be mailed to you from Stuart McDonald, LMI, and a whole bunch of other places. And there's a pretty good selection there, too, at Stuart McDonald and LMI, especially if you're just looking for something very sort of run-of-the-mill, like orchestra model plans or dreadnought plans or something like that. They'll have all of that. Now, for downloads, like, say, a PDF download of plans for whatever, a dreadnought guitar or whatever you're looking for, I would check out a company called Georgia Luthier Supply, or it's Georgia Luthier Supply. Let me check that real quick. Luthier Supply, okay. It's Georgia Luthier Supply, not Lutherie. And they're pretty good. I actually haven't bought anything from them, so I say they're pretty good from looking at their website, and I've had a lot of students purchase plans through them. We're not affiliated in any way, but I point to them when people are looking for PDF plans as opposed to physical paper plans that you could buy from StewMac or LMI. Okay, Yohef988 writes, do you over radius the fret just like a standard fret, or do you match the radius of the fret to the fingerboard precisely? So what he's saying is, let's say you have a 12-inch fretboard radius. Do you try and get those frets to be exactly a 12-inch radius before you hammer them in, or do you over radius them and then hammer them in that way? Which is preferred? That precise match is technically ideal. If you're going to err on one side or the other, you want it to be an over radius. And it's really not much of a problem at all, even if you're severely over radiused compared to your radius on the board. That is much better, much more preferred than the converse, which would be your frets are too flat. they're at an under radius. With the problem that you run into there is when you try to hammer one side of the fret in, the other side is almost always going to pop out, and then especially if your fret slots are not beveled, it's very likely that when that other side pops out, it's going to take a piece of chunk of wood right along with it, especially if it's ebony, because ebony is really brittle like that, and it just very easily breaks apart. Oh, and so he asked this specifically about a video that I did on Evo Gold. So he's talking about Evo Gold here, and I made an extra special note here when I responded to him to say that with the Evo Gold, you can actually only purchase that in, at least as far as I've seen, in pre-radiused coils. So the fretwire already has an over radius to it. And the reason they do that is because Evo Gold happens to be of a certain material where when you try to bend it yourself at home, you're almost always going to break it. It's just a little too brittle. Stainless steel fretwire, I'm sorry, not stainless steel, nickel silver fretwire will bend in a fret bender very easily without breaking. Evo Gold will not. So your answer to this question is it's already answered for you, because with the Evo Gold, you can only buy it in an extreme over radius for whatever radius your fretboard is anyway, and that's actually an okay thing. The fact that it's well over radius to your fretwire, I wouldn't worry about that. Again, much better than an under radius. Precisely matched is ideal, but it's much better to have that over radius than it is to have an under radius. So Andreas Kiekenborg, I don't know why that's so hard for me to say. Andreas Kiekenborg, writes, how do you make your logo on your guitar? So what I do for my guitars, the way that I like to put a logo on it and, you know, brand myself is through wood inlay. So here's what I do. I'm assuming you already have a design in mind for your logo. You take that design, and if it's digital, you print it out. If it's non-digital, it's just, you know, drawn on a piece of tracing paper or something like that. You make an extra copy of it, of course, because you don't want to mess with your original here. You make an extra copy of it, and you're going to stick that down to whatever material you intend to use as the inlay, be it pearl or wood or copper or whatever. And then, oh, I like to stick it down, by the way. Some people use different types of glue, but I like to use double stick tape, actually. I think it works fantastic for this. You just got to be careful when you're sticking it down. It's real easy to put it down in a way that the paper, you know, crinkles and your whole image is distorted. But that's okay as long as you have several copies. You can try it once or twice and get it down real good with that. Especially if you have something like a tennis ball or something like that to roll out the paper so that you don't get those crinkles on it. And then I'm taking a jeweler's saw and I'm very carefully cutting out that inlay right on my lines. One mistake that a lot of people make with this is they cut outside the lines thinking, oh, I will carefully sand or otherwise finesse my way down to the lines after I cut it out. That's actually a really bad plan because the jeweler's saw is about as precise of a tool as you can get. So if you cut it out oversized and then plan on sanding down to it or filing down to your final shape, it's probably going to look worse, not better, than if you just try and be as precise as you can with your initial cuts with the jeweler's saw. Cut it out with the jeweler's saw, and then I route out a pocket with a Dremel tool. You need a good router base for your Dremel tool. I like to use a 3/32 of an inch spiral down cut bit, but then I also have much smaller bits that I actually acquire from a local dentist who he actually sterilizes used bits that he uses in dental work. He sterilizes them for me. I go down there, I pick it up. He actually doesn't charge me anything. So anyway, I use those very fine, very small bits to route out a pocket. And usually that pocket is a little bit oversized so that the inlay can fit in there, and then any small gaps that are around the inlay I can fill in with ebony dust and super glue. Of course, that's going to depend on what type of wood you're using for a head plate there, but in general, any dark woods, if you use ebony dust and super glue, it's going to make those gaps virtually disappear. And that's basically it. Then I sand the whole thing down level, of course, and you've got yourself a good looking inlay. Okay, and the next question, René Relier, man, I'm so bad at this today. René Relier writes, "Hi sir, I'm going to make a mortise and tenon to joint the neck of my third acoustic guitar. What would be the required sizes for that mortise and tenon for an OM guitar, or how can I determine that myself?" Okay. This is actually really easy. The dimensions of the mortise and tenon don't really change much when you're going up from, say, an OM to a dreadnought or going down from a dreadnought to an OM. Whatever you're doing, the dimensions are pretty much the same with one exception. And here I have just a demo neck right here. With one exception, and that's the height of the tenon. So, or the height of the mortise. They're both going to change in proportion to each other, of course, because one fits inside the other. The height is going to change as the body depth changes, of course. So if you have a really shallow guitar body, then this obviously is going to get shorter. If you have a really fat guitar body, then the tenon can continue out. And the exact number, the exact measurement of the height of the tenon is actually not a super critical dimension anyway. I have a simple rule that I follow that I came up with myself, and again, it's very non-critical. And it's that I measure 11 millimeters off of the back surface of the guitar, and that is where the end of my tenon will be, and thus the end of my mortise, as far as the height is concerned. As far as the width, going this way, just keep it the same. Whatever you're doing for whatever other size guitar that you're using, when you switch to an orchestra model, nothing else changes in that regard. Same thing with the depth, which is it going this way. Keep that the same. Why would it change if you're, changing your scale length or anything like that? The answer is it wouldn't. It's not affected by the scale length. It's also not affected by how large the upper and the lower bouts of the guitar are. The depth and the width should all stay the same. The only thing that changes is the height, which is the distance from here to the peak of the tenon and the mortise down here. Okay, and another question, T5766L, that's a great name, a lot easier for me to pronounce than some of the other ones, writes, "I bought a guitar with no inlays. Can I have them installed when already built?" Yeah, of course you can. So the only issues you run into there are the fact that the fretboard is already radiused, and even more importantly, the frets are already installed, and so they're kind of in your way when you go to level those inlays. So it's definitely doable, but it's less than ideal. I prefer to put the inlays in while the fretboard is still flat, for one, because it's much easier to locate the centers when there's no radius on the board. But again, it's not impossible with the radius. It's just a little harder. You got to use a flexible straight edge and just be very careful when you're marking out for your centers. And then your other challenge, of course, is going to be the fact that the frets are already there and they're in the way. Normally, when you install an inlay into the fretboard, the frets are not installed, and so you can still sand. You can take a radius beam with sandpaper on it and sand those inlays down flush without worrying about the frets being in the way. Now, with the frets being in the way, you need something like a sanding stick. You just have to be very careful trying to sand that inlay that's poking up down flush ever so carefully without sanding heavily in the surrounding area. So it's possible. Just go slow with a sanding stick. Okay, so Redbach23 writes, "Why is it called a 40-foot radius?" And what he's referencing is my radiusing and kerfing the sides video. Okay, so imagine a 40-foot radius on a circle. If you don't know what a radius is the distance from the very center of the circle out to the circumference of the circle. So it's half of the diameter. So a 40-foot radius on a circle would make for a very large circle. And now imagine the contour of that circle applied to a very small object like a guitar body. And the radius on a guitar body starts to make sense because that radius, a 40-foot radius, when applied to a guitar body, appears almost flat. Because again, it's based off of that imaginary enormous circle that is much larger than the guitar itself, which makes for a very broad and nearly flat looking radius on the guitar. If you learned something here, please give this video a like and subscribe so you can be notified when I release a new DIY guitar making video every Friday. And if you want to really learn more, take one of my structured online courses at ericschaferguitars.com or register for a hands-on guitar building workshop here with me in Burnville, Pennsylvania.